Hey guys, Toast here. Now that the Battlefield 1 beta has finally come to an end and the masses have had the chance to play it, we have a pretty good idea of what to expect with the final game release. Some people loved the game, some people hated the game, and then there were many like myself that saw a lot of potential with it, but a number of things that needed to be fixed or balanced before we could feel comfortable deeming it a great game. Today I want to go over some of those balancing tweaks that I feel are needed prior to release in order to make the game feel like a fair and well-balanced AAA first-person shooter. I'd like to preface this by saying that there are some people who believe that the game should strive for as much realism for the time period as possible. Then there are others who say that realism should be sacrificed for gameplay, which is the camp that I fall into. Battlefield, while not an unrealistic game like Titanfall, Halo, or Call of Duty, is not a military simulation. As such, gameplay mechanics should take precedence over realism to make the game more enjoyable. Let's start with the classes themselves, since most people playing the game are going to be spending a hefty portion of their time playing as infantry. I'd like to talk about the fact that I think every class should have access to weapons that are at least viable at every engagement distance. This is something that I felt Battlefield 4 did really well with their subclasses of weapons like carbines, shotguns, and DMRs, which were available to all classes. This gave each class a series of weapons that everyone had access to that were useful outside of the designed range of the class if you wanted to try out a different playstyle with a different class. An example being a flanking recon who could equip a shotgun or carbine to get into close range and set up spawn points for their teammates behind enemy lines. I think this is something missing from the game that made each class in Battlefield 4 more viable, and I personally like that. As the weapon system stands now, scouts are really the only useful one at long range, medics the only really useful one at medium range, and assaults the only really useful one at short range. The medic class feels decently balanced at this point from an overall perspective. The medic's gadgets are tailored to support your team with bandage packs, med crates, and a syringe. It's a classic medic style, and nothing feels too overpowered or too underpowered for their gadgets. That said, the one defining issue I've found with this class is the lack of indicators telling you that your teammates need a revive. For a class designed to keep your team alive, there should be more prominent indicators of who can possibly be revived like there were in previous games. As it stands, all you see is a small skull and crossbones on your minimap, and then you have to scan the ground for the corpse. While this may add to the realism in a small way, it takes away from the gameplay. The Scout class similarly feels quite well done as their gadgets are used primarily to highlight targets, disrupt targets, or help take out vehicles. In all honesty, I don't feel like there need to be many changes done to the Scout class at this particular point. The Assault class, however, is one that I'm on the fence about. In particular, I'm divided on the AT rocket gun. This is essentially the RPG of Battlefield 1, and my current concern lies in both its effectiveness as well as the mechanics of its use. As it stands, a hit from an AT rocket gun will do anywhere between 11 and 15 damage to a heavy tank, meaning it would take anywhere from 7 to 9 direct hits in order to take one of these tanks down. To compound its relatively low damage to vehicles, it also needs to be bipoded either on a piece of cover or debris or by going prone, making the user stationary while trying to take out the target. To me, this makes the already arduous task of trying to take out heavy armor even more daunting. I think that one of three things needs to happen in order for the process of taking out armor to feel a bit more reasonable. Either A, the assault should have the ability to move or at the very least stand where they wish while using the AT rocket gun. B, the AT rocket gun should do a little bit more damage per hit, or C, heavy tanks should have their effectiveness reduced, which I'll also touch on a little bit more later. Many may disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine, but these are my opinions, and you're of course entitled to your own. Finally, the support class feels very underwhelming to me. This again stems from the weapons available to the class, which don't really seem to excel at any one range, and again this could be remedied by weapon subclass availability. Again, they have the typical support gadgets like ammo and trip mines, which are more or less the Battlefield 1 version of claymores, making this class feel pretty well rounded for what it is. Moving on from classes and weapons, I'd like to talk a little bit about vehicles. To start, something that's pretty hotly contested, and that's horses. Some people love them, some people absolutely hate them. I personally think they're a bit too powerful for a single-person vehicle. There's a few things that I think need to happen in order to balance them. To begin, I don't think either the one-hit melee or the shooting is too powerful at this point. I'm actually okay with those aspects. To me, the bigger issues are the hitboxes and the fact that the horse can still secure you a kill after you died. I think it's fine that the horses themselves have higher health, I actually agree with that aspect, but that said, it feels like the hitboxes are a bit lenient when it comes to hitting the horse versus hitting the rider, making shots that for all intents and purposes should be taking down the rider's health actually take down the horse's health instead. I think DICE needs to work to make the hitboxes a little bit more accurate to ensure that if you hit the rider, it's the rider taking the damage and not the horse. I also think that once the rider is dead, the horse should not be capable of killing anyone until a new rider is on it. Many a time have I gotten off a really great headshot right before the rider was about to get to me, only to have the neutral horse barely touch me and give an instant kill to the rider. It's incredibly frustrating and something that I feel needs to be addressed. Tanks for the most part also feel very powerful in the game. Now tanks should be powerful because they are vehicles, but I feel like some of them are perhaps just a bit too powerful. In particular, I want to focus on the heavy tank as this is the one that I've found needs the most balancing. As the driver of this tank, you have a heavily armored vehicle that can take a ton of explosive damage before being destroyed or even disabled. You're able to use high explosive cannon rounds that deal significant damage to not only other vehicles, but can also take down virtually any barrier on a building and one-shot enemies within a small radius of landing near them. You have a secondary anti-infantry cannon that can one-shot any infantry within close range and two-shot up to medium range, and then you also have the ability to heal the tank on your own from the driver's seat without ever even having to exit the vehicle. All of this with literally one person in the tank. To me, this seems a little too powerful, as no one should be able to have that much power and utility at hand without the need for other players to help support. This can be amended in a number of ways, from reducing the overall health of the vehicle to doling out some of the higher powered weapons to other players as is done in other Battlefield games, to even buffing the anti-tank weaponry given to the infantry. How they go about adjusting it is ultimately up to them, but I do feel that there needs to be some sort of adjustments made. I would also like to briefly touch on air vehicles. This is something that I'm hoping perhaps we just haven't seen yet due to the scope of the beta. However, I would like to see some sort of transport vehicle like the transport helicopters of Battlefield's past. As it stands, the air vehicles available are good for two things: taking out other air vehicles and taking out some ground vehicles. Now, I would love to see some vehicles dedicated to transporting players and rewarding the pilots for putting themselves at risk against armed air vehicles to get their teammates to objectives. Hell, make them 6 or even 8-person vehicles capable of being periodic spawn points for not just your squad but your whole team, and that could make for a really interesting dynamic change. The final thing I want to discuss is the melee. Battlefield 1 is currently suffering from the Call of Duty panic knife mechanic. This is where you're shooting someone, and for all intents and purposes you should have the kill secured, but they hit the melee button, and despite being directly in front of you, you're given no way to evade or counter this, and they're given an instant kill. In Battlefield 4 there was a counter mechanic for those who attempted to melee you from the front, and while it wasn't perfect and certainly needed some adjustments, it stopped the vast majority of those situations from happening. If you want a first-person melee brawler, you have options out there like Chivalry Medieval Warfare that are exactly that. Melee shouldn't trump weapons outright in any situation like they currently do, and frankly, it's infuriating when it happens to you. But that's going to do it for the handful of balancing issues I wanted to cover in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments some of the things that you think should be done to the game before it releases. If you liked the video, please leave a like, and if you want to see more content, please subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is Toast, and I'll talk to you soon.